Good morning, everybody. Thanks for braving the weather and sticking it out. Welcome to Seed Stories. Sara Straate will be presenting. She came to Seed Savers about a year ago from Loretzen Gardens, where she was the plant records um, curator. And she came here and got the job title Seed Historian, which is a job we've never had here. It's a job that probably doesn't exist in a lot of places. We've also called her the Seed Sleuth, although sometimes I'm sure she feels like the Seed Stalker. So she's going to tell you about some of the adventures she's gone on, contacting people and finding out about the history of our seeds and the stories of the seeds in our collection. And so without further ado, here's Sara Straate.
Good morning. We all like a good story, don't we? Yeah. Well, stories have also been important here at Seed Savers, and we have a enormous collection of over 20,000 varieties in the preservation collection here at Heritage Farm. They've often come to us from private individuals across the United States, and oftentimes each one does have a unique story of its own. The public wants to know more about stories these days. They're getting more interested in their food and where it comes from, and they want to hear the story of it from the farmer or from the seed saver. I think stories provide gardeners with a connection to their food. We've seen a response to stories in our commercial catalog. This year we profiled, perhaps you saw, Grandpa Admires lettuce and the Emmy tomato, with more complete stories of how they came to us here, and the Emmy tomato actually sold out in January of this year. Stories, though, are more than just an easy marketing strategy. They reshape knowledge into something more meaningful. Stories are motivating, and they make people care. People are more inclined to share stories with others, and stories also give meaning to data. Our mission here at Seed Savers is to save North America's diverse but endangered garden heritage for future generations. And through members like you, we're building a network of people who are committed to sharing and conserving these heirloom seeds and plants. We also hope to educate people about the importance of cultural and genetic diversity. At the annual conference and campout last summer, Jeff McCormick, founder of Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, said this in his presentation. Stories provide valuable information in ways we can't predict. Stories often capture information that may seem insignificant in the moment, but such information may become valuable at a future date. This statement really hits home because during Seed Savers' 37 years, we have operated most times on a shoestring budget with limited staff, and preserving stories and historical narratives wasn't always a priority, plainly because there wasn't simply time to do it. When information was collected, it was sometimes done inconsistently. Here's an example of some early seed storage from that time. Diane and Kent began keeping a backup, essentially, of the exchange themselves in their home. This happened as people were no longer able to garden and save their own seeds, and they wanted to make sure that there was a place where they could send them so that they could be preserved. As you know, the seed collection has grown into an entity all of its own and is now the largest non-governmental seed bank in the US. Now we have sophisticated climate-controlled storage facilities, specialized staff. I'm sure you got to see some of that if you took a tour around the building yesterday. Here we have a view in our preservation lab of one of the climate-controlled rooms. It is a balmy 36 degrees Fahrenheit in here, hence the reason for a winter jacket. Today we refer to the work of maintaining the collection as preservation. Our preservation work is all about maintaining and documenting the collection, which is focused on member-donated North American varieties, although we do have several open-pollinated varieties, those with commercial historical significance. Perhaps catalogs no longer carry historical varieties any longer. We have many of those in the collection as well. In 2010, we began the effort of the Core Project. It's essentially a specialized effort to consolidate all the documentation we have here on the campus, which was stored in various buildings and in various files. We are also hoping to gather new information, which is primarily what my job entails, getting back in touch with donors, telling them that yes, we do still have this in the collection. They're oftentimes so delighted just to hear and know that it is doing well. As I mentioned, we have over 20,000 records in our database, and we're methodically going through each one, record by record. So I think it's going to take a little while before we even hit the halfway mark. As each accession is reviewed, we attempt to verify key pieces of information, such as the individual who donated it, hopefully their source as well, and any significant names and dates that belong in the historical narrative. One outcome of learning all of these stories will be that we will identify the varieties that are most in need of preservation and promotion. So today we're going to be talking about some of these stories that we have uncovered through the core project, and it allows us to better understand our collection itself, but also to honor these earlier seed savers. So here we have an example of a popcorn which was donated to the collection, and the donor, a Mr. John Michael of Pennsylvania, sent this to us in 1995. In his original donation letter, John wrote, "Ernest V. Brown was born in Whitley County, Indiana in 1889, and he lived there until his death in 1971. He was my great-grandfather, and for many decades he grew a non-hybrid variety of popcorn for his own consumption. According to family history, Grandpa Brown acquired the popcorn when he was a young man, which would mean that he got it sometime around 1910 to 1915. That's kind of a narrow window if you ask me. Grandpa Brown got the seeds from a family named Overmeyer, who moved to Whitley County from Wisconsin and brought the seeds with them. During the 1970s, my father acquired some of Grandpa Brown's popcorn from Grandpa Brown's brother Melvin. My father grew it every summer for a number of years in our suburban New Jersey lot." John ends his letter with, "To whoever reads this, I wish you success in growing the popcorn, and I thank you for continuing my family's tradition. You should take satisfaction in the fact that you are helping to preserve this strain from extinction." John's full letter was 2 pages, single-space type, so this is just a short excerpt from it. But he provided wonderful details and a really complete history of how his family had been a steward of this variety. But there are hundreds of letters that don't have near the documentation as this one, and so that's primarily what the core project will help us to identify. We want to learn the names of those people and places and dates, and sometimes donors would send us a unsolicited donation simply with the information, "My family has grown these for several generations. I hope they do well for you." The core project manifests itself in many ways. We have received donations in all sorts of forms of packaging as well. Everything from letters that have been written on napkins to brown paper bags like this. I've even seen one written on the reverse side of a tax form. Rather unusual. Here's one of my favorites, though. It is a type of some sort of foam packing material that has been wrapped up into an envelope and then wrapped in masking tape as well. And the donor wrote all of the pertinent information right there on the tape itself. The core project also involves calling up people, trying to track down contact information for individuals who may have moved, or sometimes, as I'm unfortunately too often discovering, speaking with descendants and folks who can share memories of our donors. We write and exchange letters with people who don't have telephones, and early on it became apparent that each variety would seem to walk up to the stage and say, "Here we go, this is my story." So why don't we get on to some of those stories? Now, just to give you a little background information, the image that you see on the left is a scan from our evaluation staff. Those are actual pods and seeds that were laid down on the bed of a scanner, and this helps us to accurately document everything from size and color of the plant parts. We also scan leaves, and you'll see some cross sections of fruit as well. The photo on the right is a evaluation photo taken out in the field. Many of our varieties stay in storage for a number of years, and so images like this help us to just have something to reference. If someone were to call us up in the future and ask us about a variety in the collection, chances are we haven't grown it out in a while. So images like this are a very useful tool in that way. Lima 199 is named Phoebe Vincent Heirloom, and we received it in 1987 from Mrs. Phoebe Vincent of Waverly, Nebraska. In her letter here, she wrote, "Dear Sirs, I am sending some of the brown lima beans that are descended from some my mother used to raise and gave me some seed when I married and left home. I have raised them some years, but not every year, as the family seem to prefer other kind. I have found they outbear the white limas I have had. As my family do not raise their beans and such, I hate to see them just lapse away. I am 87 years old, 88 July 2nd, so can't expect too many more years. My mother came from a German mixed with French family. I do not know if the beans came from there, but Mama was careful to raise some. Respectfully, Phoebe Vincent." Last fall was the first time we had reviewed Phoebe's letter in quite a while, and we began to investigate possible ways of contacting her. But the reference to her age indicated that she had been born in 1899, so didn't think it was likely we would catch her on the phone. We were, however, able to locate a gravesite photo of her and her husband's in the cemetery where they're buried. And through the genealogical website where that photo was, we attempted to contact the family. And would you believe it, but later that same day, via a smartphone email, we received a response from their great-granddaughter, Jennifer. Jennifer put us in touch with her mother, Sandra, who would be Phoebe's granddaughter. And Sandra generously shared many of these photos that you see here and reminisced about her grandparents. Sandra mentioned, "I remember Grandma telling me about sending the seeds to be preserved. Grandma was a very thrifty person and always saved seeds to replant the following year." Sandra had many childhood memories, including those of her grandmother's large vegetable garden and her practices of organic gardening and crop rotation. Sandra also mentioned, "She always had fruits and vegetables, especially strawberries and black raspberries year-round. Vegetables weren't something that she bought at the grocery store." One significant piece of information which Sandra was able to share with us was the year that her grandparents were married. In Phoebe's letter, she mentions that she received the lima bean when she left home and got married. And while Sandra herself didn't actually know when Phoebe began growing the lima bean, we were able to tie the date back to her letter. So this allows us to state with certainty that the lima bean has been a family heirloom since 1919. I just love this photo of her, which was taken shortly before her passing, I understand. Our next story is a garden pea. Here we have another evaluation scan and photo. Grandma's pea is a dwarf variety. As you can see from the photo here, it's just barely reaching the first rung of the hog panel fence support, so that gives you an idea. It's very short in stature. It averages just 9 inches tall. And according to our data, the pods are fibrous and the pea is best eaten shelled. Out of a taste evaluation of 75 varieties here at Heritage Farm, Grandma's was found to be moderately sweet. It came to us in 1995 from Mr. David Niswanger of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Dave wrote a fantastic letter, and it's a little long here, so stick with me. He writes, "Dear Sirs, knowing your interest and concern about heirloom seeds, I am enclosing some garden pea seed, which to my knowledge is not available on the commercial market. This pea is a dwarf, which I understand is a recessive trait. It grows about 12 inches tall and does not require staking. The flavor is different from any peas I have tasted. It is not as sweet as some varieties, but this is not a defect, but an enhancement of the flavor. This seed has been in our family for at least 130 years. the James Roberts family brought the seed to Missouri around 1864 from Tennessee. The Roberts family originally came from North Carolina in about 1791. My grandmother, Cora Lee Roberts, was the daughter of James Roberts and was about 3 or 4 years old when the family moved to Missouri. She married my grandfather, David Benton Niswonger, on September 13, 1877. After selling their farm in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri in 1885, they joined a wagon train led by Cora Lee's oldest brother, Castle, to homestead land in Texas. Now, I thought this was an interesting fact. I had to do a little research. The average wagon could only travel about 10 to 20 miles a day, depending on the weather and terrain and factors like that. So as you can see here, they were probably on the road several weeks when this next series of events occurred. Dave goes on to write, "But on the way, Grandpa Roberts died, and a short time later, Castle caught pneumonia from riding in the rain to map out their trail and died. These events upset the family to the extent that they did not know what to do. Cora Lee and David Niswonger bought a farm in Webster County on Cantrell Creek near the cemetery where Grandpa Roberts was buried. The rest of the family finally settled around Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Cora Lee and David had bought a farm in Webster County from a Mr. T.B. Lewis, and after 1 year, sold it back to him and returned to Bollinger County, which adjoins Cape Girardeau County. Cora Lee and David bought a 214-acre farm from Dr. Thomas O'Kelly in 1887 of Patton, Missouri. Through all of these moves and tribulation, Cora Lee managed to hang on to the pea seeds. We call them Grandma's peas. Sincerely yours, Dave Niswonger." Now, Dave is 85 years old and still lives in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. He and his son John both garden and have maintained the family tradition of growing this pea. In fact, it's still served at Thanksgiving dinners, even today. Dave is a retired hospital administrator, and he was able to recount many memories of canning peas with his grandparents. Unfortunately, this past spring, Dave, shortly after planting, the area received over 20 inches of rain in just a 2-week period, and it washed away much of the freshly planted pea seed. But like any good seed saver, Dave hadn't planted all of it and still had plenty in reserve. Here's a final shot of one of our images of the pea. Our next story is of Simpson okra, okra 109. In our database, it was simply described as very good, heirloom of Mrs. Nora Simpson, Rogersville, Tennessee, 1990. This information was extracted from the yearbook listing of Dr. James Wolfe of Rogersville, Tennessee. He had listed it every year from 1994 to 2010. Dr. Wolfe donated it to us in 2001, and he passed away just last year. Unfortunately, this was all that we knew about this okra. We did know that other members in the yearbook had listed it from time to time, but as you would have it, they all had received their original seed from Dr. Wolfe, so they didn't have any additional information. One of our staff members, Aaron Burmeister, started researching this okra and attempted to contact Nora Simpson, who was mentioned in Dr. Wolfe's description. Aaron soon learned that she had passed away in the 1970s, so he started to try to contact all of the Simpsons in the little town of Rogersville, Tennessee. As you would have it, out of the blue, Aaron received a telephone call from Dr. Wolfe's widow, Phyllis Wolfe. Phyllis had called because she wanted advice on what to do with James's large seed collection, which was still in a freezer there. She wasn't, quite sure how to disperse it. Aaron, of course, took the opportunity to ask her if she knew anything about this particular okra. And she said, "Of course. Nora Simpson was my neighbor. My husband James had many seeds saved by Nora." So Phyllis put Aaron in touch with Nora's daughter, D.V. D.V. Simpson, that name hadn't come up in the telephone listings because she didn't have a telephone herself. So Aaron sent her a letter with a few questions about the Simpson okra. Here we have Phyllis photo of how it has grown for us here at the farm. It's quite a large plant reaching 4 to 5 feet. DV sent responses to Aaron's letter, and I'll just read a few of them here. How are the pods typically used? DV replied, breaded and fried, used in vegetable soup, cooked with tomatoes, and any other recipe using okra. Is this a family heirloom? This is the only okra my family has grown since I can remember. When did your mother first grow the variety? I can remember my mother, Nora, growing this in the early 1940s. In what year did you begin growing the variety, and how did you receive it from your mother? I started growing a garden in 1954 after she became disabled. I used all the varieties she had saved, including the okra. Here we have a photo of DV on the left, taken with her sister Rosella. Phyllis Wolf kindly took this photo at church one Sunday for us. And you can't tell it from the picture, but Rosella does not like to have her picture taken. Our next variety is the Sweet Fall squash, which came to our collection in 1998. Based on our evaluation data here at the farm, Sweet Fall was found to be a mixture of blue, green, and orange exterior, the skin color. It has a very uniform shape and a rough, warty texture. The flesh is usually a deep orange color, and it boasts a very, very sweet flavor. Other than that, all the information we had on this squash is what the donor, Ortha Breaker, had written in her letter. She wrote, Dear Sirs, enclosed are some of our 1930s squash seed. In the picture, the squash measure 16 inches in length. We have named them Sweet Fall, as we have no idea what kind they are. Also, I think they look like a football. Ortha Breaker. After getting in touch with Ortha and her husband Wallace this past fall, they were able to tell us that they had originally received the seed from Wallace's cousin Harold. Harold lived near Lincoln, Nebraska, and had been growing it since I believe since the 1940s. But he had originally received it from his uncle, and can remember him, Roy Snyder, growing it as early as the 1930s. While Wallace does not know how Roy originally got the seed or when he got it, he knows that it has been grown in the family for quite a while. The family has lived near Orleans, Nebraska, which is not too far from Lincoln, and as far as we know, they are the original source of this seed. Ortha and Wallace were able to confirm that the squash is indeed very sweet, and they just eat it after being baked, just served with butter and salt. We had a taste testing at our Harvest Festival recently, and our staff confirmed this very enthusiastically. Our next variety is another lima bean. I kind of have a soft spot for lima beans. Lima 147, Grandma Stort's Speckled. This came to us in 1989 and was donated by an individual in California named Annabelle Downing Beery. Annabelle wrote in her original letter, sorry. Dear all seed savers, thank you very much for accepting my seeds. I have been especially anxious to get them into someone else's hands because we did not have a very good growing season here this year. It is time that the seeds went home to the Midwest. I have been growing the speckled limas here in Escondido, California since 1983, when my mother died. I am 70 years old and the fourth generation to grow them. We do not have the moisture in the air that is found in the Midwest, and our sun was unusually intense this year. The seeds were a little smaller this year than usual. These beans were grown in Cornelia, Missouri as early as the 1860s by my great-grandfather and great-grandmother Stort. We always called them Grandma Stort's Speckled Limas. They are drought-resistant, and my mother used to say that when all else dried up in the summer, we always had speckled limas. They are a vine-type plant, and Mother said she remembered that they grew on the fence around the garden at her grandparents' house. My grandmother grew the beans south of Warrensburg, Missouri for many years, and then my mother grew them in Leeton, Missouri until 1983. Thank you again, and I wish you much success with the exchange. Sincerely, Annabelle Downing Beery. Annabelle's letter provided some wonderful documentation of who and where the lima beans had been grown. But here's an example of where she didn't provide the full names of those individuals in her family. So of course we wanted to try and find out if we could actually discover those people. There was also a nagging suspicion that perhaps the donation letter had been misread and that the surname Stort was instead supposed to be Stout. It just looked a little odd, I thought. After unsuccessfully trying to contact Annabelle in California and some other individuals we thought possibly might be family, I decided to do a little research into the towns themselves, and after discovering that they're all located in Johnson County, Missouri, which is west central in the state, we contacted the local historical society there. I had hoped that perhaps they might send a message out to their historical society members. We might get lucky and find a family member who was a member there. The historical society had some different information for us, though. After just a few days, they called back and said that one of their volunteers had located Annabelle and her parents in the 1920 census. Annabelle was just 1 month old. After learning this information, that her parents were named Walter and Beulah, the Historical Society was able to trace the family back 2 more generations. In the 1860 census, believe it or not, Zachariah and Mary Stout are located here, just at the bottom of the list. They're the last 2 entries. So this did indeed prove that the family name was Stout, and that it had been grown in Johnson County, Missouri since at least 1860. The census also provided information that the family had originally come from North Carolina, but without any other family members to talk to, there's no way to speculate if perhaps the lima bean did travel from there, although I suppose it's possible. Makes you wonder. Seed Savers also shared this information with the Historical Society. They have a family file of their early pioneer settlers, and so we were able to include our information and images of the lima bean for their records as well. Our next story is of the fog melon, which was grown just last year here at Heritage Farm. It came to us from a listed member, Neil Lash, who has also run the Meadowmack Valley High School Heirloom Seed Project in Maine for over 20 years, getting his high school students involved with the active seed saving. Neil's father-in-law, Joseph Maloney, wrote a letter which Neil submitted to us in which the variety is described. Joseph writes, "The melons we are discussing were grown annually ever since I can remember. The only known name I recall is that my Uncle Sam called them muskmelons, and when asked, said they had been handed down to him by his father. My uncle grew them until he stopped having a garden. My uncle's 2 sons, Raymond and Sam Jr., grew them as well when they became adults. The melons, as I recall, were kind of oval-shaped. I would describe the color outside as tannish gray, with the fruit a pinkish orange. The seeds were saved from year to year, the criteria being first, the general look of the melon, second, size and form, third, and most important to me, sweetness of flavor. The seeds that met the family's approval were dried and stored for next spring's planting. When my uncle gave up gardening, he gave his seeds to Eric Elwin, a local market gardener, who continued growing them for several years, and, as I understand, he managed the seed replacement in a like manner. Elwin eventually gave up growing, and he gave my cousin Raymond the seeds he had left. Raymond planted some of the seeds and had success. He then gave me some of the seeds, and I gave what I had left to my son, Neil Lash." Joseph continues, "I have no recollection of names and dates other than being told that melon seeds were handed down from father to son. Now, Neil's father, Joseph, was born in 1926, so if the melon has been grown ever since he can remember, probably safe to assume that that's been since at least the 1930s. Joseph is the great-grandson of Dudley Fogg, who settled in Reedfield, Maine in 1805. So the family has strong roots in this area in Maine. The photos that we see here are of Joseph's grandfather, Chase Fogg. The Fogg homestead is pictured in the background. It's always exciting when we make contact with descendants or our original donors of these seeds. And it seems that the descendants of these seed savers have been listening to their parents and grandparents tell these stories their whole lives. In conversations with them, they seem to dwell on the importance of the seed and always reflect on its story. Jeff McCormick ended his speech at last summer's conference by saying, "Oral histories shift our understanding of the past, thereby changing our present-day perspectives. Such stories change the listener. There are stories that illuminate and preserve the connections between people, plants, and biodiversity." Maybe these stories will change people's behavior enough to become seed savers for the very first time. Maybe it just makes people think more about where their food is coming from. But for us, that change is hopefully a place where people can send seeds when they no longer are able to preserve them. Here we have an excerpt from Fred Pearson's letter when he submitted a squash to us in the 1990s. He said, "We came very near to losing this one, for Mrs. Jetty Harn Johnson is at this time very sick and has not grown this squash for a few years. But thanks to you, I believe there is an ample supply for future generations." Hopefully, we are encouraging people to become seed savers for the first time. As it happened actually with Phoebe Vincent's granddaughter, Sandra. Sandra wrote to us, "I really didn't garden until after my husband and I moved to Phoenix in 1970. She, Phoebe, did give me some of the seeds, and I did try planting them. But being a modern working mother, I didn't save my seeds like she did." Here we had the opportunity to reinstate her family as a steward of this variety and sent her seeds this spring. We've been able to do this with a few families thus far and look forward to being able to share more. These have been just a few stories of varieties here in our collection. And as we make contact with each family and learn these new stories, I'm sure we'll be able to share more with you in the future. I look forward to finding them as well.